Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for our final installment of our AI governance series. Steve Daniel and myself from NDash, Phase 3, Pilot and Evaluate. We're going to go ahead and get started right now.
I want to say the LinkedIn event still just says the event will start soon.
Give it just a moment. I think we can take a look, but it looks like
we're live.
Yep, there we go. It has a bit of a delay. I think they put those delays in there. I don't know. It's, like when they used to do that thing in live events where they would want to make sure if somebody accidentally or intentionally cursed or something, that you had a little bit of time to beep it out. So maybe StreamYard is on to us. But joking aside, we're going to go ahead and get started right now. So without any further ado, the final stage of our 90-day plan from principles to practice, our 30-day phases. So we'll go ahead and get started. Steve, as co-founder of NDash, can you get us kicked off with what our name means, what we do, and why we do it?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Steve. My brother and I, Nick, we started this company about 10 years ago. We chose the name NDash because it is a punctuation mark that most people aren't familiar with. It represents, it's like a hyphen, but it's used to separate dates. It represents the gap between starting point to end point. And so we are here to serve as facilitators in that gap, getting you from A to B, from current to ideal to goal state.
That's wonderful. So, and that's part of why I signed up, and very happy to be a dasher, as we say, as well as this idea of very simply in a single character, where you are to where you want to be. So sharing these webinars and this guidance that we hope is helpful for you and your organization is part of that, just sharing with the broader community. So our implementation overview, first, we want to really start with the basics. So what does holistic, responsible, ethical AI look like? And when we talk about governance, people have different ideas about what governance looks like. Traditional governance, at least from my experience going back way too long, about 30 years, governance is traditionally that how, building those guardrails, policies, et cetera, to manage risk, in this case, AI risk. And that's part of what we do. But we look more broadly. We look more holistically. We also say that when we look at governance and guidance, that we include the why. So our version of governance is not just the how, it includes this why, the ethical principles, fairness, managing, understanding bias, and mitigating that. And then finally, leadership. You can't do the how, and you can't do the why. You can't understand those. You can't make those real without having leaders, both by title and by role and by the overall organizational way that folks live within your organization, the who. That's really important because it is leadership that is the success or failure of any sort of governance framework. And so these are really important as we look at today's session and more broadly what governance looks like. Again, extend your gaze a little bit, we highly suggest, for really looking at holistic approaches to risk management. From there, our strategy overview, just as a reminder. So this is our last installment in what has been a four-part installment. The first being a simple overview. More broadly, we went through these 30-day phases one at a time. So the first is to explore and align, to make current AI use visible across the org, clarify where AI influences decisions and outcomes, have ownership for AI influence work, and then aligning early on AI use for real business priorities. So again, our idea of governance isn't just making sure you stay out of trouble with AI, but are you focusing your organization's effort on the things that really matter for the organization? And that's just good business leadership. In the session prior to this one, we went deeper in that second 30-day phase of designing and prototyping. So once we started understanding where we were, current state, where we'd like to be, we started looking at designing and prototyping our organization's framework, and also starting to look at what might be a first big substantial AI pilot that we might want to start with, but the smallest version of that particular pilot, so that we can really focus, again, AI where it's going to impact the organization most positively. The impacts, the outcomes are what we care about. And then phase 3, which we'll be going deeper in today, and it's going to be a little bit different because Steve and I, especially Steve, will give you a little bit more of a little bit more detail in terms of how we at Endash have implemented this framework for governing our work and making sure that we're doing the right things organizationally. So we practice what we preach. And that's what we'll cover today. And that includes running a controlled pilot with real users, looking at outcomes, quality, risk, capturing lessons, no matter how good those plans are. I forget the first individual who I heard this quote attributed to, but there have been variations of it no matter how good your plan is, you should occasionally look at the actual results periodically. So that's something that we want to do in phase 3. And then from that, make an objective assessment on, is this going well? Do we want to extend it, expand it? Do we want to pivot, et cetera? So those are all things that we're doing in parallel through this period of time. So let's go a little bit deeper now. So phase 3 is where we pilot and evaluate. What does that look like? So as you may have mentioned as you may remember, as we'd mentioned in our prior sessions, we have 3 work streams, 3 areas that we work on in parallel. And again, this is one of the approaches that allow us to get this framework implemented in a 90-day period. Which some folks have said, that seems highly unlikely that that's possible. And we know that it is. And part of that is distributing the work for those work streams. The first one, really, that strategy and alignment, that business focus. One of the biggest things that we do in this phase is to launch the pilot, track those outcomes, and capture learnings and refine scope. So again, one big piece of governance is making sure that we are doing the right things, that we're focusing our organization's resources on the right efforts. And so those are the things that we do in this last 30-day period. We kick off that pilot. We are tracking the outcomes. And from that, we're capturing learnings. And then as need be, we're refining scope or changing scope. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that looks like and what you do at the end of this process next after you've completed that 30-day period. From a data and model approach, Steve, what are some of the things from a more of a technical perspective, that software craft, that technical aspect that we'd be doing in parallel? So this secondary work stream that we talk about, what are we doing in the data and the model approach?
I'll just preempt this by reminding anybody that's watching that you don't have to have a super technical prototype, a pilot in place to run this. But if you do, then there are some specific performance and validation and testing that you want to have in place based off of the metrics that you defined in the previous phase that you should use to determine whether you want to move forward with or scale or completely drop the pilot. So monitoring performance, documenting issues. For us, we'll go into this a little bit later, but there was a lot of that because we have our pilot open sourced on GitHub right now.
Which is awesome, yeah. And I know we're both really excited about sharing as we wrap this up, the real world, like this in practice. So, and thanks for calling that out too as a reminder. Like these first pilots for a lot of organizations won't be highly technical. Again, we're not trying to get excited about the technology. What Steve is talking about is very important. We're caring about those organizational outcomes. However we get there, that's really what we're looking at. But for things where we do have highly technical aspects of a solution, looking at the architecture is going to be core there. And then finally, from a risk and change management perspective. And I think that is still in almost every area that I see, not just with AI more broadly, organizational change management, the people side of things is often underappreciated and not as much of an area of focus of I think what Steve and I believe is very valuable. So in this last 30-day phase, we're really getting that user feedback, as Steve had mentioned. I'm one of the users of the solution, as is Steve, that we'll talk about today. And we have real feedback, things that we bumped into. That is a reality, and that's good to collect that early. Excuse me, conducting that basic compliance check. So again, we've established an acceptable use policy. We need to actually make sure that policy is being adhered to. And that's another, not specific to AI, but having been responsible for governance and risk management in a number of organizations over the last 30 years, a lot of places have a lot of policies. The auditing of those policies often comes too late, if ever. And that is really something that we want to do early and often, not to be punitive or penalize anybody, but to make sure that we're actually adhering to those specific rules that have been established in that acceptable use policy that we talked about in our prior session. And if you missed that, these videos are all on YouTube, and this is all referenced in our book. So please take a look as you wish to get more detail there if you'd like or need that.
I just wanted to backtrack real quick, just because I said the thing about preempting about non-technical, but even if you have a non-technical pilot, just like a custom GPT or something, there are still opportunities to monitor performance, document issues, and really look at that architecture, especially if it is a rough pilot low code that you might want to build out. That next stage architecture is something that might involve a little bit more technical thinking. So yeah.
No, and thanks for calling that out. And without going into a lot of detail, I know, Steve, some of the things that you and I have worked on and talked about started as a GPT because they're very easy to build. But once you use that as your prototype, which we highly encourage prototypes of any sort, then we can say, hey, this worked. Now, how do we make it production ready? How do we make it easier to use? How do we make it scale? How do we make it whatever? So thanks for calling that out. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I was just adding another, but yeah, exactly. So, and that's something to think about. What can you do like easily and quickly to get results that you can then use to decide whether you want to put more man hours into building something for yourselves.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So this is what we're doing in this 30 days. It may seem like a lot, but again, one of the not so secret techniques is we're splitting that into 3 different work streams so the work can be distributed to different folks. And there's very limited, if any, dependencies there. So a little bit deeper as far as this stage to capture learning and refine scope. So after the pilot, just to go a little bit deeper on what Steve and I were just talking about on that prior slide, this is this idea of now that we're piloting, and this is why we do it early. This is why it's part of our governance, because nothing, and I will say from a lot of years of experience in a lot of different areas, nothing substitutes. There is no simulation that is a good substitute for actual real world users using it for real world needs where the stakes matter. You're not playing around with the tool. You're reliant on it to do the work that you're doing. That's where learning really comes from. That's why we really like this approach. So we want to have that qualitative and quantitative data from pilot users. It's one thing if they say this is great or I hate it. We need that qualitative feedback. But we also want to have that quantitative feedback. I used it 100 times. It crashed, 20%, 50%, 70%. Now I understand why they would be unhappy. Or I use this and I got great answers 70% of the time, or whatever the case may be. Whatever those things are, but we want to have those counterbalancing things. They're both important. So it's not an either or, it's a yes and. We want to assess the impact against those targets and estimates from phase 1. So again, as Steve had mentioned, you'll have some metrics no matter what you're doing. We'll talk about some of the metrics that we looked at and that we do, look at to hold ourselves accountable. If your organization, by the way, doesn't use metrics to guide your work, and this is very common in a lot of organizations, including really big ones from my experience, this is just an opportunity to start that process to really use data not solely to guide your decisions, but use data as really important context to be objective. I may really love an idea. I've had a bunch of ideas that I love, but they weren't the right ideas for that moment in time. And this helps us be objective so that we don't work on pet projects, fun projects, exciting projects that don't have the ability to move the needle for our organization in terms of those outcomes. That is another thing, again, that's really, I think, important about our approach to governance is we're really looking at outcomes. It's not just about staying safe. It's about doing the right things with the resources that we have been entrusted with for the organization. We also want to look at part of this process about any kind of real world use, unintended byproducts. Steve and I will talk, primarily Steve, a little bit later about some of the things that we bumped into, but a little bit of foreshadowing or prefacing on this is the first time that we had the solution, it works quite well. But for a new user trying to install it from scratch, that experience was really messy. Some of you may have a lot of experience in areas like this when you're building products. Works on my machine used to be the old joke. But those are the sorts of things that with real users, we actually know how to improve what we're doing. We want to look at patterns across our operational, technical, and other areas in terms of the use of these tools and technologies. And then as far as that specific pilot goes, that MVP, that prototype, whatever it is that we're building for real world use, based on this real world review, we started trying to use it for real world needs in this scenario. We've got some data now from that. The team makes a decision, the organization makes a decision as part of governance on what you're going to do with that. So, Steve, anything else to add on this one before I move to the next slide?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Good stuff. All right. So now, again, this is where we're going to go into some real world. This is life at N-Dash and how we have applied this framework in practice for us. So, scope for AI governance at N-Dash. And again, if you were part of our prior sessions, you're familiar with this. One of the things that we established as part of the earlier phases is what is the scope of governance for us? Excuse me. For us at N-Dash, this we work through this, and that the scope of governance includes internal drafting and refinement of artifacts, research, synthesis, and summarization. Some custom GPTs. Steve and I are a big fan. They're not as popular as they used to be. Totally fine with me. It's a way for us to get things working in some cases 10 minutes or less. And then internal app coding. So Steve's going to go a little bit deeper on some of the things that we've done from an internal app coding perspective. You can see a couple of our products. They all have mascots at this point. But these are things that we are doing within N-Dash, and these are part of what our governance policies and practices will cover. So one is expectations for in-scope use at N-Dash. AI supports. That verb is very important. Thinking and drafting. Outputs get reviewed before they're used or reused. We don't just copy, paste, and hit send or post or whatever. No AI-involved artifacts go to clients or live online without a human N-Dash review. Here's another area that I've started being more explicit when Steve and I have these conversations with communities about what our framework and our approach is and our philosophy behind that. The phrase human in the loop is very popular. I don't think that bar is high enough. And so we call it that human in loop is actually expert in the loop, because just like you wouldn't give a developer, junior engineer who started yesterday the code review of a really complex piece of code that you're refactoring, right? You need that to be somebody who is an expert. You can't just say it's another person on the team. So that human review, whatever that is, needs to go by somebody on the team who is appropriately qualified to be an expert in that area. And that changes. There are some things that I am an expert on and I can be that person. There are other things, code review being one of them, that I'm not qualified to do. That would be an expert like Steve or others from our team. So again, it's not a human being named specific, but it's that specific item that needs to be reviewed, and the expertise needs to be for that scope of that particular deliverable, artifact, item, etc. Anything outside of these guidelines at N-Dash is explicitly prohibited. So it's light, it's not punitive. There's not a lot of rules, but we want to keep them simple. We want to keep them clear because the rules keep us safe, right? It's not really throttling anybody from doing things that they could or should really want to do. So, but it is standard governance that we use within N-Dash so that everybody is really working towards that same approach. And again, more about the philosophy than it's not a 100-page manual. I think it's maybe 8 with a lot of white space in terms of our entire policy. And it really could be distilled down into a couple of pages. So keep it simple if you want people to follow it. Explicit exclusion. So not only what is it okay for, but let's be specific about what it's not okay for. What's out of scope and why. So, Steve, would you walk us through? I really like what you put together on this slide. What's out of scope, and
Sure.
what's the reason why? Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. The why you'll see comes a lot from those principles we just listed. So I just want you to be prepared for that, so you can get a sense of how you determine what is out of scope. So one strict out of scope would be final client deliverables without review. We can use AI to help generate, inspire, create, review client deliverables, but the important thing here is we can't do that without any review, and higher consequence work needs more control. So that's all. That's the reason. That's because it's
Right.
facing the public or our clients. This matters. It makes a difference on how we're perceived. So it's important that that we make sure that it aligns with who we are and what we intend to say.
Right. Our
Similarly,
standards haven't changed, whether AI supports it or not. We like to think we have an extraordinarily high bar for quality, accuracy, integrity,
mhm.
and we don't outsource that to other people, and we don't outsource it to other tools, including AI. So thank you for that. The next one, legal and regulatory interpretation. Why is that excluded, at least for now, if not forever?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear. There have been legal rulings at this point that state that AI should not serve as a lawyer, or you shouldn't be using its output as with as much weight as a lawyer that is trained in it. So I think in terms of any legal justification or paperwork, it's important not to just let the AI have that. Bring in the law expert into that loop.
Right.
Yeah, and then sole reliance on AI for recommendations. We can use AI for inspiration, but we have a team of inspired and like experienced team members, and so it's important to use that resource where we have it to narrow down the list from AI, or to bring in new ideas that AI may not have considered. And lastly, we got the high impact decisions without oversight. So similar to the legal and final client deliverables, making decisions with AI can work. It can help you think of things that that you wouldn't intuitively think of, but you can't just say, "Hey, what should I do?" ChatGPT, and then run with that. So right. It's important to bring the team, the leaders, in on that to weigh the risk versus the reward.
Right, and the guidance may be good, but nothing is going to be a substitute. To Steve's point, the organization has the experience, the organization has the context, we can apply this idea, the AI context window, and how much context can you have, but really nothing, especially for what Steve had talked about, those areas where there's really a high level, like the stakes are very large for those particular items. We really want to make sure that we're still not outsourcing those decisions and outsourcing that thinking, because the expertise still is within your organization. I love, Steve, the word of inspiring. We really want to use these tools. We just want to use them properly. A screwdriver and a hammer are not a good combination. Both of them have great independent value. Apply the right tool for the job. Mm-hmm. So the next pilots, I recall reading in posts on LinkedIn probably for the last 20 years. I see one probably weekly about Steve Jobs. Big fan, obviously, as you can see some of the artifacts from Steve Jobs, Apple, and Next Computer and beyond. But one of those quotes involved, whether it's legend or true, Jobs having folks in meetings talk about explicitly what they're not doing. So whether or not that's myth or true, love it either way. When we looked at this, part of the challenge, especially, for me coming into N-Dash to an organization of incredibly talented folks who can build stuff so quickly, and now even quicker with AI, what do we say no to? What are we saying no to? And again, there's a lot of you who may be watching this going, well, that's not an AI problem. You are correct. AI exacerbates and amplifies this problem because the cost of creation now is so easy, so low to actually get these things in. The barrier to entry is low. The cost is relatively low to create. But everything that happens upon that creation and afterwards is really what we have to talk about, including opportunity cost. It's not just what the actual expense, but what is the opportunity cost? What's going to happen if you try to do everything? What is the impact of that? Or if you choose trying to do everything at once, you're really going to do everything poorly, if at all. So part of what we did and part of our governance in choosing our one pilot is, what did we not do now? So this one was tough for me. This was a product that had already been contemplated. I had looked at competitive things in the marketplace and saw not a prototype, but a pre-prototype version of what this might be, and said, we need that. I need that. I think this is wonderful. But we deprioritized it. And that was tough, except it was a great exercise in governance. So why did we deprioritize this? So again, and we also, Steve, we didn't say no when we talked as a broader governance team. We talked through this informally and we said, why, we love this. We know that we need this. We know we can do it, but we said no. Why did we not do this as our first option?
Yeah. So we'll get into this in the next slide. I don't think we really introduced NDX other than a brief comment about it earlier. But right. The pilot that we did choose to go with initially and really focus our attention on, because like you were saying early, with these AI tools, I've experienced this myself. It's very easy to open multiple windows, terminals, whatever, and have things running in parallel. And your focus is so divided and limited on each project that it's hard to get to completion, and to recognize all of the nuances and like areas that your one application could be improved. So we decided let's put this and the Vox app down to the side, because N-DX is a tool that we can use to help build and develop the Vox app, and right. And it's an open source app that we want to make more broadly available to other people, and we can get feedback that way. So yeah,
right. So that's just that discipline, but that ultimately paid off. Because N-DX also can help build this tool. So there was an order of operation, but we got there by saying, what we had to make that difficult decision between a lot of good options. The next one, the Agile Swiss Army knife, this was one that I had contemplated over a year ago and had a set of tools that I wanted to build. Same idea, though, is that N-DX, this was a good and useful tool, and we likely will build this at some point in the near future, but it wasn't the first one. We didn't want to have a bunch of these things happening in parallel for all of the reasons that Steve just talked about and beyond. But also in this case, N-DX, the tool that we'll talk about in more detail, the one that we did choose, was more broadly valuable and allowed us to help build these other tools. So by choosing this and being disciplined about it, it ultimately was more efficient, allowed us to be focused and to get better quality. So as Steve had mentioned, you may be wondering, and this was intentional, well, hey, we haven't introduced it yet. Exactly. So that's what we chose not to do. We had at least 3 really compelling options, things that we knew were useful, usable, and needed by communities that N-Dash really looks to serve and support and be part of. So this was what we chose to do. And you can see the smile on my face, and you can see it on Steve's. It's not just because we have the coolest mascot for, ever, perhaps. But this is N-DX. And Steve, if I may, can I hand over the keys to you on this one? Because I know you've done just some exceptional work in building this, the ideation behind it. I am overjoyed with what this tool does, but this was our first pilot and was built within that time frame. So can we talk a little bit about what N-DX is? And sure. we'll keep going through.
Yeah. So I think the initial inspiration for this, it was towards the end of 2025 when we started experimenting with Claude Code's Ralph Wiggum automated requirement implementation for product requirements for an app. So we saw that, and we recognized that it was a great opportunity, but there was also a huge opportunity for risk introduced in automated workflow implementation and development. So this was our solution to that risk. It's a three-piece software tool, SourceVision, Rex, and Hench, where SourceVision uses Codex or Claude Code. Right now, we've got it built in, or you can take through the CLI or MCP and API for Claude Code and OpenAI's Codex. SourceVision analyzes that and gives you real-time feedback and analytics and suggestions for your code base based on patterns that it observes. Then Rex is the requirements section where you can use your SourceVision output, or you can plan an app from scratch or pick it up in the middle and say, hey, we have these features we want to build out your requirements document with epics and tasks, epics, features, and tasks. And Hench is the automated workflow tool that's a part of that as well. And now we're also building a Gauntlet element to it, which helps with testing throughout. So it's an ongoing app that we keep building out. You can see here is if you go to n-dx.dev, you can learn more about that.
And download the repo. It's the links to GitHub are there. If you're so inclined, we'd love to have you check it out. Shameless plug, but it's open source, free, and useful and usable, we believe. So, but this was our first product. So as you can see, we had at least 3 great options, but this one was the clear winner quantitatively and qualitatively. But we talked about it from a governance perspective, and we put our efforts on that so that we could get it done more quickly, that we could get it done with more quality, that we really, as a team, could rally around that. And then fast follow with Vox, which I guess it's appropriate to announce it in the middle of our last webinar. So we've now just started Vox because we've finished up the first round of N-DX, and it's been working quite well. So now that product is in production, and we've moved on to our second thing. And when that's done, we'll likely move on to the next one. And it may or may not be that Swiss Army knife app, because other things are going to come up, and that's the way that it should work. And that's good governance, not just AI governance. Good governance is good portfolio management. So
I'll just reiterate that the reason we chose N-DX first, the name is N-Developer Experience, but we call it NDX, N-DX, whatever. The reason we chose this first was because it is a tool that will help us build these other tools that we have planned. And in developing the other tools using NDX, we can then get real-time feedback on how N-DX is working for us and what we need to do to make it more usable for ourselves and for the general public as well.
Thank you. And thanks for calling that out, because again, never quite sure in these sessions who's going to actually be watching this. But for a lot of us, if your background is in traditional software engineering, portfolio management, project management, you probably are seeing some things that you're saying, hey, this doesn't feel like AI governance. This feels like portfolio management. Yes, by design, because we don't want to have different disconnected ways of governing different things. Your office, your environment, your organization has these needs. You've got a portfolio of needs that you've got to deliver upon, and services and products that you offer. That's holistic. We want to have a holistic approach. And so what Steve had mentioned, I think, it was core to having a governance committee that also looked at what was the right way to spend our organizational resources with AI. And so it did indeed benefit in that way as well. So what it does, so again, talking about what this pilot would be, Steve, I'm going to bring these slides up. And if you would be so kind to talk about what it does and the governance implications here, because again, this is our pilot. This is the first thing that we chose to do. We want to make sure that it's effective, that it's working out well. But there's for this in particular, this particular product, Steve alluded to some of this. There's also governance implications from how we're using the product as well. So Steve, you'd be so kind.
Yeah. So I kind of walked through this initially, but
right.
I'll just I'll start with one that's popped, or yeah, I'll just kind of walk through.
PRD, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So in terms of governance for this, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
no, it's fine. So we'll tag team on this. So on the left hand side, what does N-DX do in
Mhm.
this space? It, as Steve had mentioned, and you had called this out on the prior slide or the one prior to that, that it transforms code into structured plans. It's this excuse me, this closed loop delivery system. So that was that competitive comparison that you saw on that prior slide in terms of the feature set. There are many tools that do all of these things, at least as of the time that we started this. There was not one tool that did all of these things, and that was part of the intent, was that we really wanted that source code management, excuse me, the PRD management, the prioritization, using natural language to create new features and improvements, and then executing those things. Those are often different tools and are what is becoming a really complicated tool chain. We built something that did all of that in one, and Steve had talked about that. So with that, the governance implications that the tool itself has is we've got this traceability, that those changes, now the tool itself also enforces some governance, which was kind of cool. We've got that clear lineage between the coding, the code base planning, execution, and what the outcome was. We've got standardization of work definition, control over that autonomous execution. We've got those guardrails that are baked in. So in this product itself, we've woven in governance. And if you'd like the last three, Steve, you feel free to take those, or I can take them. But I think it's a really great set of governance. It says implications, but I think when you had provided this list and we had talked about it, I just thought this is really cool that we have a tool itself that is helping enforce these governance practices.
Sure. Yeah. I think that because of some of the strict practices we have in place in this tool, there's a lot of logging that can be used for auditing and validation, especially now that we're building out this gauntlet element of it, which runs comprehensive testing to make sure that the system is working, and eventually also to ensure the TDD development process is effective as well. And then alignment between system reality and planning. So it's an ongoing iterative development process where you plan, you develop, and you verify that those plans were developed effectively and correctly, and then you move on, or you iterate on those plan developments that may not have been implemented according to your spec. And lastly, this is kind of a collapsing of all of these other ones, that in our workflow, governance is embedded. It's not externalized because we have these checkpoints or logging inside that we can use to validate that we are following all that we are ensuring that all of the above listed bullets are still available and effective.
Yeah, and all of those being, again, in that unified system. So that really allows us, without trying to build integrations, wondering if they're working, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, having that all in one interdependent, symbiotic system. I am not a software engineer by trade, title, history, or anything else. But I have led teams like that before, and a tool like this I would have loved to have had, and I'm sure that those craftspersons on my team who were writing and ensuring that good code was getting out there in the hands of our customers in production would have loved to have had something like this. But truing back to the point of this conversation and governance, we really want lightweight governance woven in, and as you can see, it's woven into this product. But really thinking about governance it's important. We want it to be light so it doesn't really slow us down, but that it does prevent us from doing things that we really don't want to do, shouldn't do, accidentally or intentionally. So this is a wonderful way to connect all of those in one real solution. So we talked about, in terms of choosing our pilot, when we were talking about what those metrics might be and really defining them, and the baselining and really understanding how we want to quantify how well our pilot AI use is or is not. We want to be objective, right? We may think it's working great. We love to see these cool responses and it's writing code, and that's awesome. But back to that old adage that I had mentioned prior, like no matter how good it is, you should occasionally check the results. Checking the results includes quantification. So we've got some screen caps from GitHub. So we open source this, as Steve had mentioned. Some of the metrics that are here, and Steve, feel free to jump in as well. I'll just point out at a couple of them in the interest of time. But when we want to see, again, we're not trying to make money on this. This is about providing things that, you know, we our motto, we bring it up a lot, but we really try to live by it. Our mission, as well as our motto, is make work feel better. So providing tools for free, open sourcing them, and letting people improve the work that they do, efficiency, effectiveness, collaborative nature, avoiding those pitfalls by having governance woven into the tool. Our metrics were what? So Steve, what did we really want to see when we were looking at our outcomes here? What were some of the GitHub metrics? And you're far better versed in the world of open source and GitHub than me. These make sense to me, but could you talk us through quickly, like what these metrics and what they mean?
Sure. These are just a handful of the metrics that we care about and that we could explicitly get easily. There's some other metrics in terms of our outcomes of NDX that we want to track and that we've been working to consolidate in terms of application features developed and internal usage of the app, bugs come across. But here from GitHub, what really mattered to us is once we made this an open source tool and started advertising it, we wanted to see that people were aware of it and trying it out. And so clones and visitors are great stats to see how productive and how much attention the app is getting, as well as our referring sites and specific GitHub pages that have unique visitors. So those are the stats that we have here from GitHub. But there are other important outcomes that you'll want to track with your pilot, depending on what its purpose is.
Right. So thank you for that. Those were some good metrics about, you know, again, if our success metric really is making sure that it's in the hands it is in the hands of as many practitioners, craftspersons of software and product development, then those are the metrics that we cared about. And that's what we had talked about was, you know, our success means that lots of people are using this and they're finding it useful. We're not trying to monetize it. We're really just trying to provide help and relief. So those were the metrics. If we were doing something for profit, those metrics might be very, very different. Some other metrics that mattered again, and Steve had talked about this on one of the prior slides about monitoring things like performance. So could you talk us through this a little bit? It's sort of self-explanatory, but just from a layperson's perspective, why do we care about monitoring performance, especially in a quantitative way?
So we released this as a NPM node module as well, and for people to use it, they will need to install it and run it, and being able to track what workflows are working, what has been failing, and why, and how many jobs for each have been run, and the runtime for each in terms of timing. It's all important and something that you need to be aware of if you're trying to put an application out open source or not in the production environment. So this is just a nice little dashboard where you can see the workflows, the jobs, runtime, runner type, and failure rate. All that kind of information is important to make sure that the app is working and reliably so.
Right. And so if I, looking at this as a layperson, Steve and I could look at this with the rest of the team or others, but again, I am not an engineer by trade, tradition, or title. But I'd look at the job failure rate as a member of the team, and I go, "Hey guys, that it seems like that's maybe higher than we'd like it to be 0, but the 0 is often not achievable. But let's look at that." So metrics allow us. I don't have an answer to the question. I don't even know in this context if 13% is good or bad. Mm-hmm. I do know that by having metrics, I can do what I just did here with my friend and collaborator, Steve, and we can say, hey, 13 feels high. Is that where we want to be? Is that acceptable? What are the reasons behind it? Is that an area that we should focus on? It opens up the conversation. It doesn't have the conversation. It doesn't save us from having a conversation, but it allows us the ability to have an objective conversation to say, what do we want to do about this, if anything? And that's why managing by meaningful metrics, apparently I'm just going to be very alliterative. I just did that with 3 T's in a row. Now I've got 3 M's. But joking aside, we really want to have an objective way to know what we should be focusing our limited finite time and attention on. This helps us be objective about that. Another item that Steve had talked about, documenting needs from real users. So this is from the issues tab in the repo for open issues. I think maybe half of these are mine. But can you talk us through what is this? So this is another way of, the sooner we get it in the hands of our users, we're starting to get some feedback. And that was part of our governance as well. Good product hygiene, good portfolio hygiene. Steve, can you talk us through this high level? What are sort of the things that we saw real world?
Yeah, I think that this screenshot was taken maybe a couple of weeks ago. So now our issues log is more. We see we got 76 issues.
Yeah, there were 70. Well, there's 78 open ones. Yes,
but it's for any of us on our team or outside the team that was using it. It's an easy way to say, hey, this isn't working. Some of those things were, for example, we built the app on Mac OS, and I work off of a Windows PC. And there were several issues initially with getting it installed on Windows. And then even after that, getting codecs working or token tracking. So there's a lot of issues that we then we'll talk about in the next section, how we prioritize and decide on where we go from there, what's most important and moving forward. But we
so
labels.
But getting that backlog from real customers was a real thing. And I run Windows and Mac machines as well. So Steve and I get to empathize on Windows permissioning and which of the, do I use PowerShell or command line, and how do I sudo in Windows? So that's always fun. But our users include Windows users. So this was really important as part of our hygiene. Also, as part of our governance and hygiene, as Steve had mentioned, prioritizing and addressing issues.
Yeah, so because this is open source, and we really do a lot of our actual website hosting and development in Bitbucket, we haven't really used GitHub. So we got to, as part of this pilot, learn GitHub projects and implement them in place here for automated prioritization and adding issues to the backlog and creating workflow or like a Kanban style project management setup based on the existing issues that we built out in that repo. As you can see here, we're making progress through that. We had one of our contractors free up from his contract, and he's been devoting a lot of his time to fixing some of these bugs and making NDX more usable. So having this in place, structured, makes it really easy for a team member or an open source contributor to join in and contribute.
Right. So for us, again, good governance includes making sure that we're working on the right things that will likely have the best impact for the organization. Not just making sure that people are using the right AI tools. Our version of governance, again, is more meaningful, again, because just making sure people aren't using the wrong tools really doesn't protect the organization. That's not sufficient governance. It's a start. It's not a finish. From there, so what done looks like at the end of this 90-day phase. So we just covered what we do in the last 30 days. Again, may seem like a lot, may seem like a little, but as we're working on those parallel work streams, as we talked about throughout these sessions, that's what allows us to move quickly in a focused way, because we're really dividing and conquering in the best sense of that phrase. So that first pillar, that business alignment, making sure that what we're doing is right for our organization. What did we do in that last period? What at day 90, or perhaps day 91, if we're being technically accurate, we launched the pilot. We've confirmed the pilot scope and boundaries. We've confirmed stop and escalate triggers. We've tracked those outcomes. We've captured the value, quality, and risk metrics. We've reviewed those outputs, and we're prepared to, if we haven't already done this in real time, started with corrective actions. We capture those learnings, as Steve had mentioned on that prior slide, and we refine scope. So we put this solution, the governance overall, as well as our specific pilot, into the world so that we actually get real world feedback, whether from users like Steve was talking about for N-DX, or internal users who are using these tools, whether GPTs or chatbots or enabled functions in the tools that you have. In all of those are acceptable use policy, those sorts of things we're going to want to look at. But whatever learnings we have, especially from that first MVP, that first exercise for us, N-DX, we've got those lessons learned. The log, our version of the lessons learned log, actually is the issues that I almost said Jira. Apparently, I use Jira so much that I call everything a Jira. But in GitHub project management, those issues that you saw, and that we refine scope and develop recommendations. So in this case, we're continuing with N-DX, but we have now moved that into production use, and we're now working on N-Vox.
I just want to add really quick, if since this is general for anybody and the governance for this, if you did something that's customer facing, like a chat bot about your company information, it's important to build something in order to ensure that you can capture learnings and get feedback from the users of that app. So that's just something.
Great point. Yeah, thank you for calling that out. Definitely. If you're rolling something out, especially if you have experience in rolling out other products in your organization, those same rules apply. AI is a how, not a why, I like to say. So it should not have different rules in that aspect. What Steve talked about, who are your customers? How are you getting that feedback, especially if they're external, but also even for internal customers. Mm-hmm. To Steve's point, the main thing is the people who are using that solution, you want to get their real world feedback. You need to. So from that, pillar 2, data and tool discipline, as we talked about monitoring performance, we showed you some screen caps there, looking at output quality and risk signals. You saw some of those. I don't know, for those of you who may have looked at some of the details, there's specifics. We started with looking at bugs, but also feature enhancements, ease of use, ease of install, those sorts of things. And then also looking more broadly from a tool set perspective within your enterprise, your organization, what is the usage across the board look like against the approved scope? And if there are any deviations, if you find that people are building or using things that are outside of the governance controls and acceptable use that you established earlier, then we don't want it to be punitive, at least in virtually all cases. There's probably some exceptions. But we do want to take immediate corrective action to either change the policy if that's what needs to happen, but more likely to remind, reinforce, help educate folks. Because again, we want governance. We want people to know it's like a seatbelt. It's there for a reason. And if people don't like seatbelts, you remind them of what happens when you don't have them. It's the same idea. It's for protection. So keep it as easy as possible, but don't try to work around it. Documenting those issues. So whatever issues we did find, we want to address ownership and corrective actions, maintain that issue log so we can track resolution. As Stephen mentioned, and this takes different forms based on what you're building, but in some cases, you may want to scale this. So you may have to look at the architecture and again, look at the controls and look at controls and logging and see if there are any issues there that you may need to address as far as gaps. And then this last one, risks, ethics, accountability, organizational change. So part of those learnings involve user in pillar 1. We want user feedback. We want to know about usefulness, friction, challenges. Look for patterns in the errors, not just one-offs. And if there are issues, we want to address them. Do that basic compliance check, again, not to be punitive, but to make sure that the rules are being followed. Most governance that I see in most organizations, unfortunately, going back decades, is people create policies, they very rarely audit or enforce them, or they wait until something really bad has happened. So don't do that. Just have it woven into your practices. Make sure that there's minimum defensibility in terms of what you're doing. And you're going to need to make some updates to your policies and controls. The reality is you'll learn things. If you're not, stop and then go backwards, I'd highly suggest, because there always will be things that you should learn when your plan and your approach and your framework that you're implementing for governance, your acceptable use policy, makes its contact with the real world, as we say. So as we're about to wrap this up, we'll go into a little bit more detail, some key takeaways. Steve, I'm going to put these up if you would like to go through these. I think that'd be good to take us home on this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this kind of wrapping it up, overview of basically what we just kind of walked through. But phase three, you should come away with the governance in place where you're confident and secure with an operational system in place. Pilot executed within business aligned scope and measured outcomes. From phase one to phase three, you will have defined those outcomes, the pilot idea, scope, and then through phase three, you make sure that you're executing it within that scope and outcome. Yeah. Define data, tool, and architecture controls tested under real usage. That's something that should have some information about by the end of day 90, because right. You will have implemented the pilot and gotten some feedback and results. Active risk, compliance, and accountability processes in practice. Yeah. Your acceptable use policies drafted in phase one, phase two now will be revised and updated according to what actually happens when you use AI in your pilot example or project. Document issues, exceptions, and control gaps, and all within a clear ownership framework. So you know who's responsible for the outputs, for fixing any of the issues, and for ensuring that people stay aligned with your policies. And lastly, you have evidence of what will scale, what will require refinement, and what you should just retire, sunset, drop altogether.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, again, it may seem like a lot in 90 days, but approaching it this way, these things all can be done. And we've done them here. We know that you can do them with your teams as well. So beyond the pilot, change and measurement, Steve and I are very big advocates for organizational change management, whether pro-sci or otherwise, but it's really always about the people. We're talking about technology and process, but it's the people who develop and live within, define, evolve these tools and these processes and practices. It's always about the people. So we want to be very thoughtful about change management and make sure that we're doing the right things there, including upskilling, especially with AI, because there's a very real understanding and fear of AI taking over people's jobs. We want them to see AI in a way that's beneficial for them and the organization. And then again, for all things, not just for AI, I would say, just as based on a lot of history, measurement is really important. You don't get rid of qualitative, but quantitative as a counterbalancing mechanism is really good to be objective, especially for things like this, where there can be strong emotional opinions in one way or the other. Principles for success, Steve. Some of the things that we've talked about, narrowing that scope so we've got faster learning, balancing innovation and control, using external capabilities. You've talked about GPTs, but where can we pull something that is off the shelf or semi off the shelf? And then, look at scalability, longer term. These things can be disposable in some cases for a pilot. But for the most part, we want things that are reusable. We don't want to have to dispose and start from scratch. Anything else, Steve? I know we're almost at time. Anything else on this slide you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think that overall balance, innovation, and control is a really important one because it's really easy to innovate right now, but without controls and structure and alignment, and we're not talking about like AI humanity alignment so much as alignment within your organization, within yourself, to ensure that what you're asking AI to do fits your end goals.
Right. Perfect. All right. And we are just about at time. So some common pitfalls to avoid. A single vendor lock-in, really want to avoid that. Nothing good will come from that, especially as tools are changing literally.
Risky, yeah, they're changing cost models and dropping models entirely.
Yeah, hidden cost explosion. So I feel like this is the current version of what happened with AWS and people getting their AWS bills and going, I thought this was supposed to make things cheaper. Look for cost expansion. It's getting worse. The data debt trap. So without doing good quality data, back when I was a kid, which is a very long time ago, there was a garbage in, garbage out. Principle still applies. I think it's timeless. And then pilot purgatory. You see a lot showing up now that people have started pilots and they just have pilots. So have a good pilot. We recommend that. Start there, don't end there. And with that, if you'd like some help on your journey, we're here. We are at time. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being part of this series, and we'll be having some new series soon. Thank you so much.
We'll post a YouTube link for anybody as a comment in there so you can access it later. Thank you.
Thanks,
John.
Steve. It's great. Bye.
All right.